Good morning, everybody.
Hello.
This is July 23rd, 2020, episode 65. And what I'm hoping will be a tasty episode on cancel
Yeah,
culture.
yeah, we're fired up.
There are,
And then after the episode, we're going to go apply for Medicare because we're 65 now.
that's right. Well, but I won't be retired because I'm going to probably opt for late retirement so I can get better benefits.
Yeah.
At least wait till 67. There are a few topics that ironically or unironically, divide the left as much as this topic. And of course, this also divides up. Everyone weighs in. Even Donald Trump has weighed in on cancel culture.
Yes.
So everyone has an opinion.
Donald, we're speaking to you. Uh-oh. Yeah. And, what I thought you were going to say is that there have been few topics where we have had preloaded comments.
Yeah, we had some preloaded comments. It's interesting that Donald, as an example, is kind of proof that cancel culture isn't as powerful as one might think. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right.
If there's anybody who's ultimately cancelable, it's him. But he has the most powerful out of anyone in the world right now. So, so
let's explain.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to introduce ourselves.
Yeah, I think we should. Hey, everybody. I'm Mark Van Steenwick. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And this is Transmission.
We are transmitting the virus. The virus of goodness and love.
And consciousness raising.
That's right.
So cancel culture, defining this is interesting because I think part of the reason I get frustrated talking about this with folks is I think it becomes a catch-all for any sort of habit that they don't like from the left that has to do with any boundary setting.
Yeah.
So if you disagree with how anyone to the left of you sets a boundary or holds you accountable, you'll throw under the category of cancel culture now, and that's sloppy. So to me, what cancel culture is at its base is it's really more of a post-online phenomenon wherein there's a public outcry against someone who is a public figure for saying or doing something that is offensive. And then the response is to boycott or deplatform them. That can also lead to them losing their job, right? And so, but every culture has a way of canceling. This is this reality. And so the question is, over what are we willing to say, we don't want to support this person anymore? And that's where it gets controversial. It's like how you draw the line and whether or not you see it as kind of overreaching purity culture or as appropriate. And that's where the debates come in.
So then the blowback about cancel culture, right, is that this behavior is too much. It's overdone.
Even authoritarian. Yeah.
Yes. It's just as authoritarian as the authoritarians against which it is railing, right? And that it's stifling free speech. It's about censorship. These evil leftists preach tolerance, but are not tolerant of those they disagree with. Right. That's often how it's phrased.
Well, and then you get these sorts of this where it goes, and I find this is where I feel like it's very sloppy. Is when you end up with some sort of like lazy horseshoe theory, where someone says, the intolerant left is just as bad as the intolerant right. And it's like, can you make some arguments in there that make sense? Yes, but that as a statement by itself doesn't make sense to me because we don't have a powerful left. And someone being upset at J.K. Rowling for being a TERF isn't the same as someone being like, maybe we should put those kids in cages. You know what I mean? Like there's this sort of the right and left paradigm doesn't. If you're calling out the behavior of being rigid, yes. people on the left have just as much capability of being rigid as people on the right. Okay, I'll agree with that statement. Sure, why not? But once you start talking about social power and dynamics, it starts to break down.
Yeah.
So anyways.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So to me, the entire problem with this critique is that it starts from the point of view that, America is this beautiful, open, egalitarian place full of niceness and free speech, where every view is tolerated equally and everybody can say what they want. And, the Teletubbies are roaming freely and happily. And
that's a terrifying world, though.
Well, yeah,
those Teletubbies creep the living crap out of me. But anyways,
Teletubbies are terrifying.
I want to cancel them.
Yeah, and the problem is that this is completely nonsensical, right? And so, if we begin not by buying into all of the conversation about cancel culture, but if we begin by saying, okay, who are the biggest cancelers? If canceling is the problem, right? If suppression of thought and speech and action is the problem, who are the biggest cancelers? Well, I mean, the biggest cancelers are American white oppressive society. They're the biggest cancelers. They've canceled millions of Africans and African culture. They've canceled Native Americans. They've canceled gay people. They've canceled people with disabilities. They've canceled anybody that disagrees with them, right? And this happens socially, politically, educationally. There's all kinds of gates and gatekeepers in our society about what kinds of things can be said and heard, what gets funding, who gets to be in the museums, who gets tenure, who, the notion that our society does not cancel people and cultures and things is ridiculous, right? It's absolutely ridiculous. And that cancellation is so much more massive than anything that, a bunch of people can do on the internet. That it's, this somewhat overused phrase, false moral equivalence, they're not even in the same ballpark.
No, I think what we notice is it has to do with what has been normalized and what hasn't. So we're used to Democrats, for example, really not being that far left at all. And so we think it's the way that generically our society, our government cancels certain topics. Like we can't even talk about defunding the police, even really. That's not even taken that seriously, even though but this is the thing we focus on is the anxiety. We hear the anxiety from the left about police and how we should not have police. And so then all of a sudden, everyone in the middle who is kind of okay with the police is like, oh my God, there's all this energy to get rid of the police. And what it is the overreaction is coming from the middle, who somehow thinks this is a crazy idea, right? It's not that the idea of defunding the police has really ever gotten a hearing. Because name one major city that's done it.
No.
But they focus on this, and all of a sudden, this small group of people is being cast as having so much power that the middle and the right is hand-wringing and thinks it's excessive and extreme. And so then there's a backlash against it that's justified because of how crazy they are. So another example, I keep using this because I think it's an important one, is J.K. Rowling and her comments about trans women. Now, she's lost some book sales. She hasn't really been canceled or deplatformed. But people that if you generally think being trans is kind of questionable to begin with, you might see that reaction against J.K. Rowling as excessive and think, oh my God, look at all these trans people, these social justice warriors going too far with their purity culture, trying to get rid of beloved J.K. Rowling. And by talking about it that way, you obscure the power dynamics of what's really happening, which is trans people have never been socially accepted, even in leftist circles. If you're trans, you know that even in leftist circles, you're not entirely welcomed yet. So this idea that somehow you as a trans person have so much power that you need to be challenged for overreaching by using your tyrannical power to silence poor billionaire J.K. Rowling, it obscures the power dynamics of it by talking about that as cancel culture.
Series has got a good comment here.
I find that those who keep barking against cancel culture often censor naming conflict and harm to the point that naming conflict and harm is considered more terrible than the harm and conflict itself. Also, they ironically are the ones that love to be right at all cost over understanding narrative. Yeah, I think it's interesting that there is this irony, there's that article or that statement that was issued by Harper's with 150 public figures and intellectuals signing off on it, that I think by itself maybe has a lot of truth and is a good thing, but it's been inserted into the public discourse as a cancel culture rebuke, right? And it's interesting that the folks, oftentimes people point to that as like, look, we got to stop this cancel culture because they're being too, they're stifling free speech. But the act of trying to silence cancel culture is itself a limitation of free speech. And so there's this lack of perspective that I think Series is talking about here, that this avoidance of conflict actually does more harm than what the conflict.
Well, yeah, I mean, to me, the attack on cancel culture really at its heart is an attempt by those in power to stifle accountability and debate. I mean, like this whole thing about, those on the left say they're tolerant, but they're intolerant of people who disagree with them. I mean, those of us who are on the left in America, we've had to tolerate left of center politics and, bullshit candidates for our whole lives. I mean, I've never gotten to vote for a major party candidate for president that I was actually interested in or felt really had good policies for our society. I've had to tolerate that. If these other folks are so tolerant, why don't they come and tolerate me and run a candidate that I would actually be interested in voting for? So again, I just think that if we accept the starting point of all of these criticisms, it's the classic gaslighting technique, right? Of you start one step forward from the real harm. And that's what gaslighting does. So it's like, I punch you in the face and then, you cry and say this is a problem. And I start from the point of view of like, well, why are you crying? Why are you being critical of me?
Why are you upset with me?
Yeah. Why are you upset with me? Why are you being mean to me? Right. And we don't start with what was the real issue. And so that's what this critique is doing, is it's trying to start, it's the don't look at the man behind the curtain, Wizard of Oz thing. It's trying to obscure the real oppressive problems by blaming the people who are trying to hold those who are oppressive accountable.
Mm-hmm. Just so everybody knows, like, getting your comments in early is better. I actually expected. I know there's a lot of heat and interest of this sort of topic. People are talking about cancel culture all the time. So I'm assuming there's a lot of you are lurking and thinking. And maybe you're thinking and lurking because you have stuff to say that's pushing back on what we're saying. So just to make it easier, I'm going to start talking about like where I think cancel culture, what it's trying to get at and what's important. But I think it needs to be reframed, because this whole way of framing it as cancel culture feeds into this sort of like cultural Marxism, like powerful leftist elite kind of narrative that's bogus. But what's true is there is a problem in purity culture with like all sorts of groups, and that there's a particular left form of it that is problematic. And a lot of it is tied up in white performance culture. Mm-hmm. So my problem, like, and I'll criticize this all the time, that white progressivism is performative. And so you have to, it's like this idea you need to act a certain way, and you have to make sure you're behaving yourself becomes the overemphasis more than changing the actual dynamics of power. And so, and this is why I think there's capitalism can really work with this sort of, can really adapt well to this, because if all they have to do is issue a statement saying, we believe Black Lives Matter now, or all they have to do is say, we fired General Manager Tim because he said something transphobic. If that's all we require of each other is official policy stances that are correct, that's a problem, because what we really need to do is change power dynamics in our communities. And so there's a way in which this sort of like overemphasis on correct symbolic responses gets overemphasized. But the problem is, like, the people who are critiquing that, who are saying, oh, political correctness, run amok. I don't think if I really believe they're saying, oh, political correctness, run amok, it's getting in the way of us actually redefining. We need to really change gender dynamics so that we can queer the power equation. Like, if that's what they really are after, then okay, yeah, there's a critique to be made there that political correctness is getting in the way. But really, when I hear someone say, oh, cancel culture is too far, they're not saying we need to go deeper and beyond it. They're usually saying that's a bridge too far. So that's, yeah.
And and I also feel like the leftist world is in many ways far more self-aware and self-correcting about things like this. I mean, over the last decade, there have been a lot of really good discussions about this issue within, movement circles and groups. And, people are aware that sometimes folks go too far, and sometimes folks get lost in the minutia of arguments that aren't really helpful, and, the right phraseology that isn't really helpful. And that's just what humans do. I feel like again, look, if you go to some legislative body and you see these 5 people debating over all the different tiny little words in a bill, they're doing the same kind of thing, right? I mean, so to blow that up into this, oh my gosh, we've got these huge fascist leftist people, coming after us. That's just a complete mischaracterization. It's no different than saying, oh, it's the protesters that start the violence. It's like, no, the police start the violence, right? The oppression is what starts the problem, and that's what we need to look at.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, leftist circles I'm in, like the people who are doing the activist stuff. Like, maybe not the people on Facebook who are reading articles and commenting on it, but people in the mix of things. We talk about this stuff all the time. And so even this corrective to call out culture, we need to shift to a call in. That shift happens among people who are activists trying to figure out how to facilitate groups where people agree. And so we generate our own critiques within ourselves. And so then when someone who is like looking at it from 10,000 feet by reading articles comments and say, this political correctness is run amok, it's like, well, I don't know if you commenting philosophically from the sidelines is the best place to be. I know I'm being snarky.
Yeah, and I mean, Sirius talked about this when she was on the show with us, and just had some great things to say, and a lot of the work that she's doing and their groups are talking about these things. I mean, there's a lot of conversation about it. And as you say, I mean, the characterization that happens on Facebook is just, or the New York Times or anywhere else is just ridiculous. Carol's got a comment here.
If we had a real, strong, unified people's movement, we wouldn't have all these easy moving targets for them to go after. Yeah. I mean, how do you get there? And
Yeah,
this is where a lot of this stuff comes in, because people will say, look, we're so divided among the left, and that's true. But I don't know the way around that, because the tactic a lot of people take in these conversations about unifying the left, usually the way I see it talked about is we need to just focus on class. So we need to become class essentialists, and then these other things, you can see these as in orbit around it. And then if you're somehow like a marginalized group not based primarily on your class, then it gets bickery, and then someone will say, oh, the left is divided. And part of the challenge is, like, how do you include trans people in the same group as radical exclusionary feminists who don't want to recognize trans women as women in the same group? It gets really difficult, because really the right is a gathering of centered around white power to maintain the status quo. The left is an alliance of it's a constellation of a bunch of different constituencies that are all working against the status quo for often different reasons, and they have overlapping concerns. So it's just harder to unify the left.
Yeah.
Not because we're somehow worse.
Well, and also that's, yeah, I mean, and then also that's happening within a culture that's so extremely individualistic.
Yes.
We're seeing this with the pandemic, that people have a very hard time setting aside their particular agenda or idea for, the common good. I mean, that's just something that Americans struggle with. And so, so creating those kinds of movements, you almost need a super strong, oppressive, boogeyman to work against, right? I mean, when you talk about the kinds of factory conditions in the late 19th century and early 20th century that gave rise to the union movements, I mean, things have got to be so bad that that's what then can bring some people together in this country. All right. With the lack of comments, I was kind of feeling like maybe we were getting canceled.
Yeah. We're experiencing.
We're being canceled. Oh, no.
Gus writes, this conversation about cancel culture and free speech seems like yet one more wonderful opportunity to reframe what we mean when we say freedom. Do we mean freedom from individualistic, or do we mean freedom for the freedom that is a means to an end? And that's this idea of freedom and I think this is part of the problem in American society is we don't really have collectively much of a category for freedom for.
No.
And so this is where right now, like with the mask stuff, it's just amazing to me how extreme this is. And to me, this isn't, I grew up, we act like individualism is the most traditional way of being American, and that, but I remember, like, I think the further back you go, the more traditional your community is. So when you had Swedes coming over, they had a communalistic way of seeing things, and they had to learn individualism. So even in my rural Minnesota upbringing, it seemed less individualistic than it does now, even though it was more traditional, because they still had this sense of like, we have to take care of each other because we are an immigrant people and no one else is going to take care of us. Mm-hmm. And once you get assimilated into American culture fully, then individualism takes its root, because it's better for driving our capitalist engine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that the other big piece to this that this argument reveals really is actually the total lack of accountability in a lot of these systems and institutions, right? I mean, when I see some old white professor with tenure freaking out because his students are suddenly railing on him, like, I have zero sympathy for that guy, zero, because first of all, once he gets tenure, he can do whatever the hell he wants. He has zero accountability. He can be, I mean, I've had professors that wander into class. They clearly are checked out. They're unprepared. They don't care. They just spout whatever they have to say, and they expect everybody to just agree with everything that they're saying. And and then suddenly they're horrified when this whole group of people are like, no, first of all, we're paying $50,000 a year for this quote education, and we don't want to listen to this shit. And that's actually really good. That's really good because those people have zero accountability. And, we've seen this. We have a number of good friends that are part of our community here that, are having to deal with these professors over at a certain highfalutin seminary that are horrible. They're horrible. They're racist. They're sexist. They don't even know their Bible very well. And yet these people have to sit in their class and listen to this crap and be graded on it, and have their thesis at risk from them. And yeah, that's great that they're getting some accountability and some cancellation. They need that.
Mhm. Yeah, this, you've said this in different ways already, but it's worth underlining several times that when we talk about cancel culture, we're ignoring the fact that there's whole swaths of people who have always been canceled, right? And so if all of a sudden we're talking about canceling Jordan Peterson, right? It's like, well, what about nice. It ignores the fact that, like, oh, it only comes up when someone who is in power gets challenged that we start focusing on cancel culture.
Exactly.
This leads to Kyle's thought. Good morning, Kyle. I think of cancel culture discourse as much more shallow. It typically comes from straight white men who are threatened with losing their social rewards for speaking up for the traditional opinions of straight white men. Yeah. He also says, I'm a doctoral student. I'm tracking with your commentary on tenured profs.
Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, those are the people that are the most upset about cancel culture, right? is people who have the most power, who are the most comfortable. Yeah, and that's an important thing to pay attention to. All right, Mark's gonna comment.
Is it fair to suggest that the dominant narratives of capitalism and authority are constantly canceling the voices that speak truth to power? Yeah, I mean, like let's look at Colin Kaepernick. So within the constellation of things, a fairly powerful person because of the position that he was given. And then he leveraged that to speak truth to power, and then was pretty much canceled. Now
it was canceled.
Yeah, but at the same time, like, his cancellation was so public, it caused a spark in public discourse. And so you had these right wingers and moderate white people anxious about it because they had to deal with it, and their upsetness about, like, oh look, the left, the intolerant left raises its head again. Like, this is how, because they felt threatened by this powerful perspective, and they overreacted to it and blamed it for the conflicts that they were seeing. Right. So it's the same thing.
I mean, none of the people that are upset about cancel culture and quote politically correctness criticize the NFL for canceling Kaepernick. I mean, yeah, they destroyed this guy's career. He's been blacklisted. He'll probably never play again. By the time maybe they get around to giving him a contract, he'll be too old. Mm-hmm. And suddenly these people didn't come to his defense and go, "Oh, how terrible to be intolerant of Colin Kaepernick." No, they said Colin Kaepernick is being intolerant. No, not at all. Yeah, and of course, those with the dominant authority and narratives, are canceling people all the time. And all right, thanks, Gus.
Mark. Hey, I don't feel like I talk about Jordan Peterson nearly enough in transmission. So
I don't even know who Jordan Peterson is.
You're blessed.
So, all right. Well, we're coming to the end of our time, and this has been a far quieter episode.
Yeah, what's going on, folks?
But those of you that have commented, it's wonderful. Really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone that's listening. Tomorrow, very excited. Tune in tomorrow, or catch it later. We've got two young activists from Colorado, one of whom happens to be my son, and then my own future daughter-in-law. So Max and Sarah are going to be here to talk about musicians and activism, because they've been doing a lot of activism with their music, and also some different really creative strategies, and to talk about Antifa, whether or not Antifa exists, and yeah, that'll be good.
Yes.
So we'll have a lot of fun with that.
Yep, and yeah, we'll talk more tomorrow, and hopefully those that you have been silently lurking and listening about this can leave your comments here after the fact. That's fine. We'll still see them. So if you I'm waiting to say something.
All right, great to see everybody. Bye.